Amidst the relentless glow of New York City's lights, where every corner hides secrets and every night reveals new desires, a young heiress faces the dilemma of her life. When Brenda, the daughter of one of the city's most powerful men, meets Joseph, an irresistible yet ambitious man, she makes a decision that could change everything. Falling in love in secret and hiding her true identity might seem like the perfect solution, but will this love survive when the truth comes to light? It was a cold winter night in New York, but the chill didn't seem to penetrate the cozy, lively interior of the bar in Soho. The sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and the beat of the music created a perfect backdrop for an evening of celebration. Brenda, wrapped in an elegant wool coat, gazed at herself in the bar's bathroom mirror, adjusting the wavy brown hair that cascaded over her shoulders. Her brown eyes reflected a mix of anxiety and anticipation. She wasn't the type of person who frequented ordinary bars. Her life had always been surrounded by luxurious events and private parties, where everyone knew her name and status. But tonight, she wanted something different. She wanted to be just another face in the crowd, away from expectations and curious stares. More importantly, she wanted to escape the constant pressures of being the daughter of one of New York's most influential CEOs. When she left the bathroom, she returned to the table where her friends were seated. The party was in honor of a mutual friend's birthday, but for Brenda, it was a chance to forget her life for a few hours. As her friends laughed and chatted, she allowed her eyes to wander around the bar, observing the people there. That's when she saw him. Joseph was across the bar, talking with some friends, but his gaze was fixed on Brenda. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a magnetic presence that made everyone around seem to disappear. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his smile was confident, almost arrogant. Brenda felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something about him that drew her in, something she couldn't quite define. What she didn't know was that Joseph had been watching her since the moment she walked into the bar. He was an ambitious man, determined to achieve everything he desired in life. And tonight, he desired Brenda. Not just for her beauty, but because he sensed she was different from other women he knew. Joseph wasted no time. He approached Brenda's table, his gaze locked on hers, and with a smile that seemed to promise the world, he said, "May I sit here?" Brenda smiled shyly and nodded. Her friends, noticing the interest between the two, found a way to leave them alone. "I'm Joseph," he said, extending his hand. "Brenda," she replied, shaking his hand. The touch of their hands sent a wave of warmth through Brenda's body, and she realized she was getting nervous, something that rarely happened to her. "So, Brenda, what brings you to this place tonight?" Joseph asked, leaning a bit closer so she could hear him over the noise. "I'm here to celebrate a friend's birthday," she answered, trying to sound casual. "And you?" "I came to meet some friends, but now I'm glad I found you," he said with a smile that made Brenda's heart race. The conversation between them flowed naturally. They talked about common interests, movies, travel, and even the latest news from New York. Brenda found herself increasingly attracted to Joseph. He was charming, funny, and had a confidence that intrigued her. But there was something more, something that made her hesitate. As the night went on, Brenda noticed that Joseph talked a lot about his dreams of success, about how he wanted to conquer the world and be someone important. He frequently mentioned that his ambition was his greatest quality. That's when an internal alarm went off in Brenda. She knew this type of person. She had often encountered men who were more interested in her fortune and what she represented than in who she truly was. So, she decided to hide her true identity. She didn't tell Joseph that she was the daughter of one of New York's wealthiest men, that she lived in a luxurious penthouse on Park Avenue, and that she had a guaranteed future in one of the country's most powerful companies. She wanted Joseph to like her for who she was, not for what she had. But the decision to keep this secret wasn't easy. Every time Joseph spoke about his dreams of social ascent, Brenda felt a pang of fear. What if he discovered the truth? What would happen if he knew she was much richer than he could imagine? However, fear was not enough to deter her. When the night came to an end and Joseph walked her to the bar's door, Brenda felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a genuine connection, something that made her want more. "I really enjoyed meeting you, Brenda," Joseph said, holding her hand as they waited for the taxi. "I enjoyed meeting you too," she replied, smiling. "So, can we see each other again?" he asked, his eyes fixed on hers, full of expectation. Brenda hesitated for a moment, thinking about all the risks she was taking by getting involved with someone who might be attracted to her wealth. But then she smiled and said, "I'd love to." When Brenda finally got into the taxi, she looked back and saw Joseph waving at her with that confident smile. She knew she was about to embark on something dangerous, but at the same time, she felt more alive than ever. There was something about him that drew her in, something that made her heart race and her worries disappear, at least for a moment. As the taxi pulled away, Brenda looked at the diamond ring on her finger, a gift from her father on her last birthday. She knew that ring represented the life of luxury and comfort she had always known, but that night, she wished to be just an ordinary girl, in love with an ordinary man. And with that thought, she decided to keep her secret for a while longer. But as everyone knows, secrets have a way of surfacing, and when they do, they can change everything. For Brenda, this secret could be the beginning of true love or the ruin of the relationship she had barely begun to build. The weeks following Brenda and Joseph's first meeting were a whirlwind of emotions. Brenda found herself increasingly drawn to Joseph, and they began to see each other frequently. Each meeting brought a new discovery, a new layer of emotions that made Brenda fall even more for him. Joseph took her to places she never would have imagined. Small, cozy bars, hidden cafes in New York's alleys, and parks where they could walk and talk for hours without interruptions. For Brenda, these meetings were like an escape from her controlled life full of expectations. She could be herself with Joseph, without the pressures of being the daughter of a powerful man. In one of their outings, while walking through Central Park, Joseph stopped to get 2 cups of coffee from a street cart. Brenda watched as he interacted with the vendor, in a friendly and relaxed manner. It was a simplicity Brenda wasn't used to seeing, and it captivated her even more. "I used to come here a lot when I was a child," Joseph said, handing Brenda her cup. "My mother and I would walk through the park every Sunday when the weather allowed." Brenda smiled, but felt a pang of sadness as she thought about her own childhood, surrounded by nannies and security, rather than simple moments like this. "Are you close to your mother?" she asked, curious. "Yes," Joseph replied, taking a sip of his coffee. "She raised me on her own after my father left us. She's the strongest person I know. She did everything she could to give me a decent life, even when things were tough." This revelation made Brenda understand more about Joseph's ambition. He came from a humble background, where everything was earned through hard work and sacrifice. Brenda's life, in contrast, had been marked by abundance and privilege. She had never had to fight for anything. Everything she needed was at her fingertips, and this difference began to stand out in her thoughts. On another date, Joseph took her to see the small apartment where he lived with his mother in Brooklyn. It was a modest space, with walls painted light colors to mask the lack of natural light. There were few pieces of furniture, and all of them showed signs of wear from time. The living room served as a dining room and, occasionally, even a guest room when distant relatives came to visit. Brenda tried to hide her shock, but Joseph seemed to notice. "It's not much," he said, with a slightly embarrassed smile, "but it's what we have. My mother and I are proud of what we've built together." "It's a cozy place," Brenda said sincerely, admiring the way Joseph looked around with a mix of affection and pride. "You've really achieved a lot." Joseph smiled, a smile that lit up his eyes. "I haven't achieved everything I want yet, but I'm on the right path. One day, I'll have a better life, and I'll give my mother everything she's always dreamed of." Brenda felt her heart tighten. Joseph was everything she wanted in a man, determined, passionate, and with a heart of gold. But she knew her secret was becoming increasingly heavy. Every time he talked about his dreams of success, she felt more guilty for hiding her true identity. Meanwhile, Brenda's life continued to be a balancing act between her obligations as the daughter of a magnate and her secret meetings with Joseph. She made excuses to avoid attending high society events, claiming she was tired or needed some alone time. Her father, Henry, suspected nothing, but began to notice changes in his daughter. Brenda, who had always been Henry's favorite, was more distant and reserved. She spent less time at home, avoided family dinners, and always seemed to have her mind elsewhere. Henry tried to talk to her several times, but Brenda evaded, saying she was just trying to find her own path. The truth was that Brenda was becoming more involved with Joseph, and this involvement was about to be discovered. One evening, after a long day at the office, Henry decided to surprise his daughter. He knew Brenda had mentioned she'd be home, so he decided to stop by her favorite restaurant and bring her favorite dish. When he arrived at the penthouse where they lived, he was met with silence. The home, which used to be filled with the sound of Brenda's laughter and the classical music she loved, was now quiet. Henry climbed the stairs to Brenda's room and knocked gently on the door. There was no response. He then decided to enter. The room was impeccably tidy but empty. There was no sign of Brenda anywhere. It was then that he noticed something different on the nightstand, a note, partially hidden under a stack of books. With his heart racing, Henry picked up the note and read it quickly. It was a simple note saying Brenda would be out meeting some friends and would return late. But there was something in the tone of the note that made Henry uneasy. Determined to find out what was happening, he called one of his trusted security guards. "Find out where Brenda is," he ordered. "And who these friends are that she mentioned." It didn't take long for the truth to be revealed. The next morning, the guard returned with information that shocked Henry. Brenda had been seen with a man on several occasions, and they appeared to be quite close. The guard also managed to identify the man, Joseph, a young man from a humble background who frequented places far below Brenda's social standard. Henry felt a wave of anger and concern. How could his daughter, the girl he loved and protected so much, be involved with someone so far beneath her status? He knew he had to act, and quickly. He couldn't allow Brenda to waste her life on a relationship that, in his view, could only lead to ruin. That night, Henry called Brenda in for a serious conversation. She tried to avoid it, but he insisted, saying it was urgent. "Brenda," he began, his voice firm but with a hint of sadness, "I know about the man you've been seeing. I know he's not suitable for you." Brenda felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She knew this moment would come, but she wasn't prepared to face it. "Dad, you don't understand," she began, trying to stay calm. "Joseph is a good man, he's not good enough for you." Henry interrupted, his voice raised. "You're my daughter, and I won't let you throw your life away for someone who's only interested in your fortune." "That's not true," Brenda exclaimed, tears in her eyes. "Joseph doesn't even know who I really am. He likes me for who I am, not for my money." "He'll find out eventually," Henry said, calmer now but still unyielding. "And when he does, you'll see that he was only after one thing." Brenda shook her head, refusing to believe her father's words. But at the same time, she knew she couldn't continue living this lie. "I love Joseph, Dad. And nothing you say will change that." "Then you have to choose," Henry said, his voice now cold. "Either you end this relationship immediately, or you are no longer my daughter." Henry's words fell like a weight on Brenda's heart. She knew her father was a man of his word and wouldn't hesitate to follow through on his threat. But at the same time, she knew she couldn't live without Joseph. So, overwhelmed by a mix of fear, anger, and desperation, Brenda made the most difficult decision of her life. That same night, she packed her bags and left home, not looking back. She fled into Joseph's arms, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, as long as she could be with the man she loved. Years passed, and with each passing day, Brenda felt the distance between her and Joseph growing. The love that once united them now seemed like a distant echo, overshadowed by Joseph's unchecked ambition. He had become a successful man, someone Brenda barely recognized. His name now circulated in influential circles, and he attended luxurious events, exclusive dinners, and parties that attracted the city's elite. Joseph had achieved the status he had always desired, but it came at a cost, a price Brenda was beginning to realize was too high. Meanwhile, Brenda's father, the powerful CEO of New York, never gave up searching for his daughter. For years, he moved heaven and earth to find her, hiring the best detectives and using all possible connections. He knew Brenda was alive, he could feel it, but her whereabouts remained a mystery. Brenda's absence was an open wound in the family, especially for her siblings, who also suffered from the uncertainty and pain of not knowing where their youngest sister was. Brenda knew that the search for her continued but was determined to keep her identity a secret. She feared that if Joseph discovered who she really was, everything would change, and deep down, she knew he was no longer the same man she had fallen in love with. In the early years of their marriage, despite financial difficulties, Joseph's love for Brenda seemed genuine. He was attentive, affectionate, and always found a way to bring a little joy to her difficult days. But as he climbed the corporate ladder, his priorities began to shift. The time once dedicated to Brenda and their small snack stand was now consumed by meetings, business trips, and, eventually, glamorous parties where Brenda was not invited. Gradually, Joseph began to treat her with coldness, as if she were merely an inconvenient part of his life, something he needed to keep but no longer desired. The nights of conversation and laughter gave way to awkward silences and arguments over trivial matters. Brenda felt she was losing Joseph to a world she did not understand and, worse, to people who influenced him in ways she never could. One night of loneliness, while Joseph was out at yet another high society party, Brenda discovered something that made her question her entire decision to run away with him. She was at home, preparing dinner, when Joseph's cell phone, forgotten on the table, buzzed with a new message. Normally, Brenda respected Joseph's privacy, but at that moment, curiosity and concern overpowered her. When she picked up the phone, Brenda's heart raced. The message was from a woman named Isabel, someone Joseph had mentioned in passing as a work colleague. But the content of the message was far more intimate than any professional relationship should be. The exchanged words revealed an affair, something Brenda had long feared but never wanted to admit. In the following days, Brenda began to observe Joseph more closely. She noticed how he hid his phone whenever she approached, how he avoided certain topics, and how his schedules became increasingly uncertain. Every detail, every suspicious gesture, felt like a stab in Brenda's heart, making her more and more regretful of sacrificing so much for a man who was now betraying her. One night, Brenda decided to follow Joseph. He had said he was going to another elite party, and she wanted to know the truth. Disguised and nervous, Brenda watched from a distance as Joseph arrived at the event, greeting guests with the confidence of someone who felt at home in that environment. She waited until he was inside before entering. The party was grand, with sparkling lights, live music, and all the luxuries money could buy. Brenda felt out of place, as if she were intruding on a world that did not belong to her. And then, she saw him. Joseph was at the center of a small group of people, laughing and talking with a woman Brenda immediately recognized, Isabel. The woman who had stolen her husband. Pain and anger consumed Brenda at that moment. Everything she had sacrificed, everything she had endured, now seemed like a terrible mistake. She realized that while she was working to maintain the marriage and help Joseph achieve his dreams, he had traded her for a world of luxury and betrayals. But at the same time, something awoke in Brenda, a desire to regain her dignity, to show Joseph and the world that she was much more than the humble, forgotten wife. Determined, Brenda left the party unnoticed by Joseph and went back home. She knew what she had to do. It was no longer possible to live that lie, and if there was anything that could take from her, it was the right to be happy again, even if it meant returning to the place she had fled from. The next morning, Brenda decided to act. She packed a small bag with her things, just the essentials, and left the house before Joseph woke up. She left no notes, made no farewells, she just left. But this time, she was not fleeing. Brenda was going home. With determined steps, she took the path back to her past, heading straight to the mansion where she had grown up. The place she had left behind for love was now her destination once more. Upon arrival, she felt a mix of anxiety and determination. She knew her family would welcome her with open arms, but she also knew she was about to confront everything she had left behind. The grand welcome party for Brenda was about to begin, and she knew Joseph had no idea what was about to happen. He was still in the dark, immersed in his own illusions of success, unaware that his life was about to change irreversibly. Brenda was back in the place she had left behind, but this time, not as a fugitive or a young woman lost in search of an illusory love. Now, she was a stronger woman, aware of the value of her family and the importance of being surrounded by those who truly loved her. Upon arriving at the mansion, the reunion with her father and siblings was emotional. Tears of joy and relief were shed, and for a moment, all the suffering Brenda had endured seemed to dissipate. Her father, always the protector, wasted no time taking action. He knew that Brenda's return needed to be celebrated grandly, and more than that, he wanted to show everyone that his daughter was back where she belonged. Immediately, he ordered his staff to organize a magnificent party, the largest New York City had ever seen. He wanted all the big names of high society to be present, and for the news of Brenda's return to be the most talked about topic in all circles. Preparations began immediately. The main hall of the mansion was decorated with elegance and luxury. Exotic flowers adorned the tables, sparkling chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and live music performed by a renowned orchestra filled the space. It was a party to go down in history, and all who mattered were invited. Meanwhile, Joseph, oblivious to what was coming, felt a strange sense of relief and freedom. Brenda had left his life, and although he was intrigued and slightly concerned about her sudden disappearance, part of him felt it was for the best. He could now focus entirely on his career, his rise within the company, and, of course, his new romantic interests, like Isabel. Joseph was at one of those elite parties, surrounded by people he now considered his peers, when he heard about the grand party being prepared by one of the city's top businessmen. The rumors were that it would be an extraordinary night, with all the big names present, and Joseph, who now saw himself as part of that circle, eagerly anticipated attending. Little did he know that this party would bring a dramatic twist to his life. On the night of the event, the mansion was radiant. Guests arrived in their luxury cars, greeted with champagne and a red carpet leading to the grand hall. Joseph arrived with Isabel, feeling on top of the world. He entered the hall confidently, greeting acquaintances and admiring the opulence around him. However, his confidence began to waver when he noticed that everyone's attention was focused on something, or someone, he couldn't yet identify. The host, Brenda's father, then took the stage set in the center of the hall, asking for everyone's attention. The music ceased, and an anxious silence filled the room. With a smile blending pride and emotion, he announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is special for me as I celebrate the return of the most important person in my life, my dear daughter, Brenda." Joseph froze at the sound of Brenda's name. A cold terror ran down his spine. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. His gaze fixed on the main staircase of the mansion, where Brenda appeared, stunning in a formal gown, with a serene and proud demeanor. All eyes were on her, including Joseph's, who now felt the world collapsing around him. Brenda descended the stairs with the grace of a queen. The guests applauded and whispered among themselves, admiring her beauty and elegance. But Brenda saw no one but Joseph, and at that moment, she knew she had made the right decision. Upon reaching the bottom of the stairs, she was greeted with a warm embrace from her father, while Joseph, pale and stunned, watched from a distance, unable to react. Brenda's father made sure to introduce his daughter to everyone present, emphasizing how thrilled he was to have her back. Joseph, still in shock, realized that his entire life had been built on a lie. He had chased success, status, and power, but in his relentless pursuit, he had lost the only thing that truly mattered, Brenda's love. The party continued, but for Joseph, it was as if everything was in slow motion. He watched Brenda mingle with the guests, smiling and chatting as if she were the queen of the place. But the real humiliation was yet to come. Later that night, he was discreetly summoned for a private conversation with Brenda's father. In this conversation, Joseph was informed that he was being fired from the company. The justification was clear: he was no longer trustworthy, his ambition had crossed boundaries that could not be ignored, and, above all, he had betrayed the daughter of this powerful man. And, as if the dismissal wasn't enough, Brenda's father also made sure that Joseph's reputation would be ruined. He would no longer be able to find work in any prestigious company in the city. Devastated, Joseph left the party in haste, without even saying goodbye to Isabel, who was left behind, curious about what had happened. He knew that everything he had built was over. His career, his status, his future, all unraveled before his eyes that night. Over time, Joseph returned to his original state, poor and without prospects. He was forced to go back to the humble job at the snack stand, while Brenda rebuilt her life with her family. Now, she was stronger and more determined, and it wasn't long before a new love entered her life. She met a kind man, a successful businessman who loved her not for what she had but for who she was. Together, they built a beautiful and prosperous family, living in harmony and happiness. Years later, while Joseph worked at his snack stand, he witnessed a scene that filled him with a mix of regret and sadness. Brenda, now a mature and radiant woman, stepped out of a luxury car alongside her new husband and their little daughter. They were heading to a nearby store, and Joseph watched them from a distance, his heart heavy. He knew he had lost the only chance for true happiness, trading genuine love for empty ambition. And now, all that remained was deep regret for losing Brenda forever.